Dr. Richard C. Miller, I really appreciate you for so many reasons, and your time, your book, your skills, your expertise, your awareness of New Testament studies, and then your awareness where that line stops and how you had to go beyond. And one of the things I found while reading your book that really made me try to wrap my head around was, I even contacted Tim Whitmarsh recently to ask him about genre and emailed him to see if he would come join me, classicist, is did the ancient Greeks and Romans believe, and I'm going to use words and emphasize these words while I say it, believe their myths were true? So we have the word belief or believe, and myths being true. And when I use the word true, I'm not going to Jordan Peterson you and try to unpack for 40 hours what I mean. Okay. What I mean is the way we understand true to be today, and that is, oh, well, this happened. So did the ancient Romans and Greeks, and are there different class levels that had different understandings of this, think Hercules really did jump on a pyre at the end of his life? Did he really exist? Did he really go around and do things, his actual 12 labors and stuff like, is that really stuff they thought really literally happened? That you can see them coming from a modern post-Enlightenment rationalist view, trying to explain and understand. Did they think that, that Zeus really was having sex with these women? Did they think that these things were true? Because I asked that because we have the idea from Christian apologists that Christians, early Christians, which your book debunks this, believed that Jesus literally, in some actual historiographical sense, rose from the dead, was born of a virgin, the whole nine.
Right.
And Justin Martyr compares them. So help me out. I struggle with the terms even today after you've explained them to me several times.
Yeah. It's okay. So we go into classical antiquity. This was a time period where superstition was rife. There were cults every which direction. You go to some place like Corinth. Pausanias discusses Corinth. He goes there. He's a geographer. He's walking around looking at all sorts of cults and describing them. This is a place bustling, a dense metropolis full of cultic symbolisms. In fact, the entire architecture of the city is described as basically almost like a smorgasbord of different cultic opportunities or beliefs or ways to express piety in different contexts and different cultic forms and belief systems. Precincts, temples, sacred trees, all sorts of things, statuary. The whole city is probably best described as in those terms. And so you've been faced with if you live there. This is the same with all of the major cities in the Hellenistic world. This is a place that was the norm, okay? Now, devotion in those contexts, they weren't sitting there asking hard historical questions about any of this stuff. That wasn't the point of it. The point was, through these particular stories, indulging in belief, and that's different than knowing, by indulging your mind and and entering into the world that's being presented there, you are able to achieve transcendence, you're able to achieve piety, you're able to achieve curry favors in some way. Did they believe in some hyper-literalistic sense that all these things were true? No. We know that from various studies. Mary Beard, we've got Price, we've got Paul Vine is a French anthropologist who really wrote the book on this. Did the Greeks believe their myths? And so this question has been explored rather deeply in the past, and we could continue to explore it, but I think it's conclusive that no, they did not have this literal. This shouldn't surprise anyone today. I don't think we do either in some ways. How astonished would it be? Let's take the most hardened Christian fundamentalist and bring them into this conversation. How astonished would they be were they to learn that Jesus, this very minute, was getting a haircut in heaven?
I wouldn't believe it.
No, because that's not the place where they're holding those thoughts. As much as they want to hold them as true in some way, in a bracketed sense, the doxastic lexeme, the area where they're registering this in their cognition, is not quite the same as the way we would describe, like, say, Abraham Lincoln or mundane facts about real history. And they were self-aware of that to some extent. Now, to what extent, I think you'll find a variation. The elites, the intellectuals of the time, freely deconstructed all this, and many of them, as even Tim Whitmarsh has pointed out, were critical of it and were openly describing it as, hey, we're kidding ourselves. If you start going down, though, down through the different possibilities there, I think you're going to find devotees in these that are very sincere even to the point of dedicating their entire lives to this and their families and so forth. And so, not unlike what you might find today with church, okay, or any other particular religion in that way. And so, but it's not that literalistic, hyper-literalistic sense that I think modern defenders of the faith want to argue for. In the New Testament, you're not asked to know things, you're asked to believe things. You're asked to confess things. And so even today, when you convert, it's not in the guts of the Harvard Library studying history that you're making a deep study into the propositional claims of the religion. That's not where the conversions are taking place. They're taking place up in the mountains at a retreat center with sing-alongs with 13-year-olds. And so it's not changed a whole lot. And so anyhow, going back then to that question about the literality, some of the literalism in this, yeah, they did play with it, but let's talk about this. What even is a legend? What do we even mean by that? It's somewhere in between literal and myth, right? It's somewhere in between, often a historical figure or a myth that's placed into a hard historical context, but is an embellishment, a tall tale, right? And so who was Paul Bunyan? Who was Davy Crockett? You know, who was Robin Hood or King Arthur? Or let's go down the list. You know, who were these figures? Who was Quetzalcoatl? Who were some of these figures in history that may or may not have existed? Almost their existence doesn't matter because they're untethered from that mundane historical context and used for cultic purposes in their own right. And
you would say Jesus fits that category.
I think he's one of those figures that's right on the line there. You know, I don't think it, just even if you were to array all of the different gospel renditions of him and look at the freedom that they have one for the next, it's this whimsical, almost astonishing creative literary work that they're doing with him. He's almost just a figurehead or a literary vehicle for them to express their own, each individual school of Christianity, their own kind of way of presenting that, using him as a literary vehicle. And so that astonishing freedom that they have in the depiction and varied ideas, John's Jesus, in my view, is psychologically so different than the Jesus you find in the Synoptics. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't even know it was the same person, except for those framing contours in the narrative at certain points, like his execution and so forth. And so, and he's obviously got the same name, but beyond that, though, I think the point of it wasn't to get to some raw, like literalistic historical person. That wasn't what they were up to. What they were interested in was, what does this figure and his philosophy, how does it perform in our lives in terms of our cultic interests to transcend, to achieve philosophical ascesis, to achieve piety, and to receive the blessings and virtues by my devotion and dedication to this particular cult. And that's really what we find in the earliest records of what the Christians were doing and what they were about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope you liked my dad, Richard Miller, in this interview. Remember to like and subscribe. And never forget, we are MythVision.